Thank you very much. I know it's been a long day for all of you, and I hope you've found it very informative. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes talking about Red Hat solutions, specifically customer challenges and how Red Hat's offerings help address these challenges. And I will give you a bit of a framing of this from the market, and I will also talk about some customers that we work with who have realized benefits through the work with Red Hat. Again, as we mentioned in some of our other presentations, Red Hat thinks about this three different ways: delivering next-generation architectures, but really the underlying infrastructure required to support this business, also the integration and technologies aligned to deliver agile business, and then finally the development tools and application platforms to allow for DevOps and agile delivery. So let me begin by telling a few stories. The landscape of competition is very, very serious, and companies like Kodak will tell you that if they are not careful, they will get taken away by the competitors. Kodak, a major US company, a major global company, has not been profitable in more than 10 years and is now still surviving but effectively bankrupt and shrinking every year because they were not paying attention to some of the nimble photo sharing technology companies like Snapfish and Shutterfly. The second way to think about the market landscape is that you need to think of yourself as a software company. Everyone is a software company. We obviously think of Google as a software company, but even other companies like Exxon, Bank of America, Walgreens, these are US companies, but Exxon, between the way they do oil and gas exploration and geographic information systems, they are a software company. Bank of America is all about transactions for financial services. They are a software company. And Walgreens is a pharmaceutical retailer. We call them drugstores in the US, but they are beginning to keep electronic medical records of patients. So they are a software company. And then finally, your competition is everywhere. If you had asked me 10 years ago who the competition for FedEx was, you might have said DHL or UPS. But today, the competitors can come from anywhere. Competitors to FedEx as a transportation and logistics company can come from Uber, who has a fleet of thousands of drivers. The competition can come from Walmart, who has their own fleet of trucks and vehicles and warehouses. And of course, Amazon as an e-commerce company also moving into delivery services. So the lessons here is always be aware of the competition around you. Think of yourself as a software company. And also, your competition is really everywhere. So this is how to start the discussion. The result of all of this is that the business is under pressure. The business is being forced to respond to this competitive environment that I just described, and they're asking for new functionality and new capabilities driven through technology. This set of requirements goes from the business to the infrastructure and development teams who need to develop applications and deploy those applications to service the business. They have to do it fast. They also have to do it with very, very keen approaches of new technology. And finally, the operations team inherits these applications from the development teams. They have to run them, they have to manage them, they have to scale them. So these are the challenges that start with the landscape of a company, but now go from the business to the development teams and then into the operations teams. So this is the pressure. Now, how are businesses performing? Well, a study by McKinsey a few years ago showed that businesses are not doing very well. When you look at how are they doing with respect to projects on budget, 45% come in over budget. 7% come in late, and more than half of them do not deliver the value that they're supposed to. So this is not very, very good business performance by any means, is it? So how are they looking to respond? How are businesses looking at new technologies, new areas to help them improve everything they're doing? Cloud and DevOps are two major areas that the market is looking at, and if you look at the research, I'll build this out, but looking companies like Forbes, who are journalists writing about this area, IDC, a leading analyst firm, and then Forrester, another leading analyst firm. They've done many, many research projects and surveys over the last few years, and when you read this, you see things like platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, cloud, DevOps, as being very significant investment areas and initiatives that companies are making to respond to all of these pressures that we talked about. Let's look at one example of a company who has succeeded very, very publicly with DevOps and with cloud. Amazon Web Services, the part of Amazon that delivers cloud services to companies and to developers. It's very funny because Amazon as a company has not made any money in their life. They've been in business for more than 20 years. Most of their business comes from distribution and retail, very thin margins overall, and as a company from a profitability standpoint, they're not doing profits. However, AWS is a huge growing segment for them, and it's also very profitable. But how are they doing this? Some of the things that they do, they're deploying at peak times, 10,000 times per hour. On average, they're doing this every 11 seconds, and their outages are less than 0.01%. So very, very good reliability, very fast, and very high scale, using DevOps and cloud as their foundation. So let's also look at another study that was done by this is the State of the DevOps report, which is published by Gene Kim and several companies who sponsor it. And Gene Kim, you may have heard of, is the author of the book, The Phoenix Project. So they also look at expectations and trends in DevOps overall. And what they see in the report that was done a couple of years ago is that companies realized higher quality, faster software release frequencies, and process visibility improvements when they use DevOps methodologies. And I'll make a side comment right now. It's interesting, we're here in Korea, which is one of the strongest countries in the entire globe for manufacturing. And DevOps brings those manufacturing principles to IT. It looks at things like Kaizen and continuous improvement. It looks at lean production. It looks at Kanban and just-in-time inventory processes that we know from manufacturing, but applies those same principles to IT and development. This is what DevOps really is. It's looking at all of the same approaches for process improvement and efficiency and tight coupling of collaboration within the teams, and of course quality, and it's applying these same principles to information technology. But it's very hard, and one of the challenges that comes up all the time is companies who say, I have technology that I've invested in and built for many years, and I need to continue to use this as I move into modernizing my infrastructure. Gartner looks at this as two worlds. They look at the traditional world, and they look at this new cloud-like world. Gartner calls this Mode 1 and Mode 2. And sometimes Gartner will talk about this as separate teams and separate groups in the company and separate initiatives. However, we like to think of this as an important set of capabilities that need to be balanced. You need to strive for moving to cloud-like capabilities, but you have to still work with and leverage the technologies and systems and data and applications that you have here and that you have invested in and built over many years. DevOps is a bridge between these. And Gartner themselves talks about that DevOps can help go from the traditional IT you have into this new cloud-like world. And that's the real key, because these Mode 1 traditional applications are the ones that are running the business. These are the financial management applications, maybe the risk management applications. These are the factory control systems. These are the customer data marts. How do these pieces of data and software get leveraged and moved into a cloud-like world? We will talk about that. That is really the key. So let's frame the problem. So we have this traditional world, Mode 1, that we talk about, with existing applications and existing infrastructure. And we have this new world that we want to try to move to with cloud applications and cloud infrastructure. And trying to deal with the Mode 1 world surfaces several challenges. Number one, you struggle with slow delivery. How can I modernize this and become faster at the way I develop and deliver? How can I deal with the complexity of this environment? In the Mode 2 world, how do I achieve and deal with agility and modernizing my infrastructure in a scalable way? So we're going to talk about these 4 areas, and I'll start by talking about slow delivery. And how specifically can I move my development and provisioning cycle from maybe weeks to days or even hours and minutes. So this is the first challenge we'll talk about. And I'll explain this through 4 stories. So the first story is this, about accelerated delivery. You have a developer. The developer needs access to a virtual machine. That virtual machine is what they use for the development of an application and packaging it for production. They put in a request. That request goes to a team of individuals from security and operations and virtual infrastructure. And this team asks a variety of questions that need to get documented. How much memory do you need? How much compute performance do you need? How should it be configured? What language is it written in? What version of the Java runtime environment do you need if it's written in Java? How does the server need to be configured? Many questions get asked and documented. This results in a set of tasks that have to be performed. To get this virtual machine for the one developer, many things have to happen. Many of them are manual steps with many different people, and they take time. The head of operations is very frustrated because he or she say, my developers are waiting for a long time to get the things they need to do for their job. And they admit that their team, in the process of doing all of this, also makes some mistakes. Because you see many of these steps. These are manual steps and are prone to error. So how can we improve this? Well, Red Hat has worked with several customers, and what we've done is implemented an automated policy-based workflow engine to help streamline the provisioning. And this entire tool has self-service built into it. So the developer interacts with a self-service portal, which triggers an interface to a service designer. From the service designer, automated tasks get generated that start defining automated workflows and configuration steps. Through this set of sequences of steps, we are able to streamline through workflow, through approvals, through this entire sequence of operations, the steps that take to get the virtual machine provisioned. The result is very fast, and by reducing the manual steps and also reducing the idle time required. You can take now what was taking hours down to minutes. You're also eliminating human error in the process. So the result in the head of operations is now very happy because you've reduced work time, you've also reduced the human error. We'll talk about two examples here. Union Bank is a large bank in the US, and they've taken their delivery cycle down from weeks to mere hours. Another company that we've worked with, Gable, has taken their provisioning cycles down 95%. So significant ways in which we've achieved service delivery acceleration. The second area we will look at is the complexity. How do we deal with the complexity that exists in your current infrastructure? And the way you deal with it is you look to optimize IT with policy-driven automation to improve the efficiency overall. So we'll start by talking about a simple set of virtualization clusters that IT operates. These clusters are, expensive, but they work. However, the virtual infrastructure administrator does not have good visibility into the performance of these clusters. One cluster is running very hot, meaning many application workloads are there, whereas maybe the other cluster does not have many workloads on it. But this administrator does not have the good visibility to see what's happening and to make decisions. The private cloud that they would like to have access to is not certified to run the workloads from one virtual machine over to the private cloud. So they are not able to easily be compliant and move workloads across from virtual infrastructure to the private cloud. And finally, they look at a public cloud as an opportunity to help scale and drive costs down, but they really don't have a way of visibility and managing into this environment. The struggle is they don't know how to balance the resources. They have areas where the applications are running very slow because they are provisioned too much onto one cluster. They can't prove that they are compliant to certain regulatory requirements, perhaps about personal information. And they're also paying too much because they're not able to move these workloads to cheaper infrastructure. So the solution is to implement a management platform that allows you to cross between the choices of infrastructure, giving you the visibility, the control based on policies, and also providing workflow and automation so you can effectively choose the right place to put a workload, whether that's rebalancing it across your virtual machine infrastructure, migrating them to private cloud, looking to ensure that you have the compliance in place for the private cloud, and what workloads should be in which place, and also beginning to look at the right public cloud options for you, including sometimes public cloud is not always the most inexpensive solution. You have to really be able to look at all of this together. So the result head of operations will look for is better quality of service, lower costs, and better compliance. We've worked with two companies in the US as well who have really increased their resource utilization from 30 to 50% by using this approach. They've also reduced some of their costs for capital and operating expenditures. A large global credit card company is achieving similar results by migrating, this number is out of date, they've now migrated 14,000 virtual machines from VMware infrastructure to an OpenStack private cloud from Red Hat. This has given them much more effective cost structure. So now let's look at agility. How do we modernize the development process to improve agility? This is the DevOps story. Now we're talking about the Mode 2 cloud story. So today, the way development is done, and if you heard my presentation this morning, you heard me talk a lot about traditional development. Siloed teams develop pieces of code or functionality. In fact, these siloed teams may align to functionality, like you may have a database team who configures and manages the database. You may have business logic team. You may have the user experience team that handles the front end of an application. So these are often separate teams who don't work together, and they develop their code, and then they throw it over the wall to the operations team, who has to understand the complexity and how these pieces fit together, how to deploy it in production, how to configure it, and how to scale it. This is a very slow process. It takes sometimes weeks or months to put new applications into production. Of course, this also means if you want to make changes to that application once it's deployed, it can also take a long time. So the head of operations, or I'm sorry, the head of development will ask, how can I make changes more frequently? How can I scale it? And how can I improve the move from development to production? Well, in order to do this, you have to completely rethink the development process. And this is what we mentioned earlier with DevOps. You implement a cross-functional team who works closely, with operations, virtualization, security, and development, all in the same team. And they produce an application together. And they use continuous integration, continuous delivery to ensure agile, rapid methods. We talk about fail fast, fail often, but using testing to develop this and therefore getting to production much more quickly and much more effectively. The head of development sees faster cycle times to develop applications and deploy them. He or she sees the ability to scale more effectively and much more success. I'll talk about two companies that have used one of our platforms, OpenShift Container Platform, to achieve success. FICO is a credit scoring company, and they were looking to scale their offerings and move into more of a software as a service model. And they needed to do this with much more openness and much more agility, and OpenShift provided the vehicle for them to do this. Cisco, and you all know Cisco, wanted to improve the productivity of their internal development teams by giving them a platform with new languages and new tools, but doing it in a controlled, process-driven way that was very integrated into the production deployment cycle. And Cisco used OpenShift Container Platform as well. The last story we will talk about is how do we deliver scalable infrastructure, scalable cloud-like infrastructure. And here, the thing to keep in mind is many companies strive to achieve Amazon Web Services-like experiences, a public cloud-like experience, but doing it inside of their enterprise. This is the goal. So let's talk about how it's done today, framing the problem. Today, to deliver scalable infrastructure, you really only have one choice. You scale by adding capacity to your machine. You scale CPU, you scale storage, you scale network. This, of course, adds significantly to the cost. The other option that exists, so there are two options. The first is the scale up. The second option is to build a scale out architecture based on open source cloud technologies But this means you and your team has to be very sophisticated to understand how these open source components operate, how they change, and of course, any of you who work in open source know that this is a very rapid changing area that is very challenging to keep up with. The other challenge you find, though, is this is what we call DIY, do it yourself. The other challenge you find is that these solutions lack the management tools needed to do things like self-service, workflow, policy, chargeback, things that I've been talking about already. Here you'll have to create your own tool or find a way to do this and connect into the solution you have developed. So the head of operations here is asking about, well, how can I do this on commodity hardware? How can I do this with a reliable solution and no outages? How can I get the management that I need to do policy, chargeback, self-service, and automation? Well, the way to do that is through OpenStack platform, a private cloud offering from Red Hat. And we've worked with many companies, hundreds of companies actually now doing this in production. And we'll give you a little flavor for how. Perhaps the goal is to have cloud infrastructure around the world. So you want to not just have it in New York, but also have it in London and Tokyo. You want a management platform that will give you the visibility and the sophisticated tools you need to do this globally across this entire set of choices. The head of operations is now happy because he or she sees that you can do this on top of x86 Intel architectures, so commodity hardware, distributing it at massive scale, and then you can really do this with a very controlled approach for how the infrastructure is managed and updated. We've also worked with a couple of companies here that have done this with OpenStack platform with Red Hat. A leading healthcare provider has brought their cloud environment together and delivered this enterprise functionality, but also created a very secure environment to prevent data breaches. And they leveraged existing hardware, existing Intel standard hardware. Another customer, a large European bank that we worked with, did the same, and they also achieved better reliability and availability of the solution. They also tied the private cloud, the OpenStack private cloud solution, into a public cloud and brought these two together. So there's no doubt that all of this innovation is happening in the upstream community. But how do you work with it? Whether it be containers like Docker and Kubernetes, software-defined storage like Ceph and Gluster, management, OpenStack for private cloud. It's exciting where DevOps is happening. It's happening in the open source community. But this leads to some very difficult choices. You know, a survey that the Linux Foundation did 3 years ago showed that almost all clouds, 76% of clouds, are built on open source software. However, for a company who wants to do this by themselves, they're faced with large engineering investments and the challenge of creating an engineering team that understands all of these different projects and their different life cycles and technology paths. It's also not their core business. Because to do this, you have to think about, how do I deliver enterprise support to my organization? How do I manage the roadmap? The OpenStack roadmap has many, many projects like Nova, Neutron, Cinder, Swift, Glance, Horizon. How do I manage the requirements I need into those projects if I'm going to do this myself? How do I get bugs fixed? How do I understand the life cycle? Especially if this is not your business. So this is where you want the innovation, but it's very challenging to get the innovation directly from open source. On the other side, you can look at an integrated solution. And this is a very viable option too. And many companies also say that integrating and protecting their cloud infrastructure is a very large priority. But it comes with a high price tag. It becomes stuck with the vendor who's managing the solution, and you're tied to their innovation roadmap, and it's obviously very costly. The solution, Red Hat delivers two offerings, Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure and Red Hat Cloud Suite, that give you the capability in two different packages to address these fundamental IT challenges that are listed here. And you can do this with Red Hat. Here's a picture of Red Hat Cloud Suite. And it really gives you the infrastructure, the management, and it also provides, the Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure gives you the infrastructure and the management, and Red Hat Cloud Suite adds on top of this OpenShift for container-based application development. So with these two offerings from Red Hat, you have everything you need to deliver against those challenges that we talked about. Accelerate service delivery, managing IT complexity, modernizing application development and delivery, and creating scalable cloud infrastructure. The way you begin this is to work with Red Hat to schedule a discovery session around any of these areas and work with our consultants. And as we've shown on the work we've done with other companies, we can also do this with you. With that, I want to thank you very much for listening to me and for coming to the Red Hat Forum here in Seoul. Thank you.